morning. This is Shweta, your host for the podcast 360-degree View from Policy to Practice. And today we have with us Dakshesh Thacker, who is a passionate educator and who has been working in this sector from past many years. Welcome, Dakshesh.
Thank you so much, Shweta. Thank you for having me here, and best wishes for the series ahead.
So, Dakshesh, tell us, a viewer, before we start our podcast, just give us a brief background about your work in the education sector, and then we'll go from there.
Right. So I used to be firstly a Teach for India fellow from 2017 to 2019. I used to teach high school math in a low-income private school in Dharavi, Mumbai, which everybody knows used to be called as Asia's largest slum. I don't like that title being given to the community, but it's what development literature used to use. After that, I used to work in one of India's leading development sector consulting firms, Satwa Consulting, serving a couple of clients in education, or philanthropic foundation, vocational education, and an education nonprofit as well. After moving to the United States in 2021, I used to also work for a center in Columbia University, which focuses on public education, where I was serving one of the largest public school systems in the United States on literacy policy as well as digital learning as well, which was pretty big during COVID. I also had a brief stint as a research assistant at the Center on Universal Education at the Brookings Institution, working with senior fellow Rebecca Winthrop on a book of hers, which recently was released, if I'm not wrong. And currently, even though I work largely in the climate and energy space, I do offer some time pro bono to an advanced math program called Mathematics, which helps immigrant students in New York City and New Jersey to prepare for advanced math programs. So I currently help a couple of teachers who teach about 8 to 10 immigrant students in the middle school age group right now. So that's been the journey so far, and I'm happy to speak about some of these experiences in detail as we speak further through this podcast.
Thank you, Dakshesh. This is quite an extensive and in-depth experience that you have, and the best part is you have worked both in the India sector and now in the US, and you can very well, do a comparative analysis. So let's start the discussion with the first prime question that I have in my mind is that what do you think is the role of a teacher in making students choose STEM career path, and how much teachers contribute to it, and what's the role of teachers training in that?
I think most importantly, in whether it's in India or the United States, the role of a teacher depends on just like being able to coach the student on developing the right mindsets, developing discipline, and being able to understand a certain new area of knowledge. At the end of the day, most of the knowledge that we teach, especially say in high school math, is not really relevant in like day-to-day lives. Like especially unless you take up very specific careers in science and engineering or medicine, where that knowledge will be of use. But the larger role that we play is just being a coach and offering access and exposure to students. Like for example, when I used to teach my students, and every day in my lesson plan I used to have a quotation of like say from something in war or something in medicine or something in math and science, which was there to basically motivate my students to give the best shot to prepare for the public examination and just plan their career ahead. So I used to like debrief that with them and talk to them about what kind of mindsets they need to develop, not just for that particular class, but like for things ahead in life. And nowadays, when I speak with some of them, whenever I go back, they tell me that this is what has helped them, or at least some of them who are investing in education still remember all of those moments when I spoke about what they need to do. The other thing, as I mentioned, is access and exposure, which is what we used to call in Teach for India, like ensuring that we provide them in view to the outer world. And this is again coming from an experience of teaching in low income communities where students don't have the best of resources, where their family members have probably not worked in services or manufacturing jobs before. And our job then becomes to like expose them to the outer world and tell them that these are the careers out there. And even today, whenever I go back to India, I meet some of the students now. They're like college students, or like some of them have graduated from college and are now in the workforce. My role is to keep exposing them to more ideas and pushing them to think about what skills they need to develop. I'm not going to be able to teach them advanced maths, and I'm not like supposed to do that either, right? They're able to learn themselves. But my job is to keep exposing them to new ideas and push them to develop the discipline to pursue a specific pathway. That's what I see the role of a teacher as, especially when you're dealing with kids who are, say, from 13 to 18. And I think teacher training, as you may asked for specifically, should focus on how do you coach a teacher to become a good coach as well. That's a lot of what our coaching at Teach for India used to be back then in the program team. Of course, we also coached on the content areas because we wanted to prepare students toward the public examination and help them get good results, because that was important in the journey of the student. But it's also about giving them this mindset coaching and giving them the right access and exposure, and just being very dedicated and just displaying your dedication day in and day out, which instills that sense of discipline in students as well, to be able to excel outside the school after they move out of school as well.
Thank you, Dakshesh. Especially the point that you mentioned about coaching the teacher to be a good coach. I think that's the key when it comes to becoming a good teacher, and how do you then motivate the students in STEM. So, when you talk about training the teacher to be a good coach, what are some of the qualities that comes to your mind that you think that a teacher should possess to be called a good coach?
I think the first thing that a teacher needs to do is possess a like growth mindset or a learning mindset, which is what we were coached on as well. That you have to be able to learn how to learn. Like, so first you have to teach yourself the content area. Then you have to think about how do you communicate this to a student, and then the deeper layers, how do you communicate it to every student, and especially say in English and mathematics, where you'll have different learning levels in a classroom. You have to be able to communicate it to a mixed classroom, where there may be a student who has, say, grade 3 level but is still studying in a grade 9 classroom. And this is a problem that I've seen is common in the global south, based on my reading and discussion with people from other countries as well. So you need to be able to contextualize it and like be able to communicate it to different students. This is the teacher training on the more technical side of things. Then comes the, how do you really embody discipline? How do you really show yourself as a teacher, as a role model in class day in and day out, right? So you need to be able to like coach a teacher to be safe, most fundamentally be on time every single day for their class. And once students realize that, then they end up taking you seriously, because they see that this particular person is there for you every single day, and they are doing what they're saying. Then after that goes into like just being able to coach yourself into preparing each day for your class, right? That you need to be able to and this worked well for me, that I used to go in extremely well prepared for a class every single day. And the students saw that. They saw that this person was really dedicated and that he was putting his best shot out there. And as a result of that, they got more invested in the subject matter, even though they weren't really that great at mathematics before that. So just you need to inculcate that sense in a teacher that you have to put your best foot forward every single day. And there will be days, most days, where your plans won't work, and there'll be something or the other in your classroom which won't work out as per plan. But you need to be able to go back the next day and start afresh and be able to give it like a good fresh shot every single day. And once you do that, you'll probably start seeing more wins. It's kind of like giving a cricketing analogy, that like if fast bowlers hit for like a six, you go back once again to the top of your run up, and then you keep coming back and bowl again and hope that the next ball is going to get the batsman out. So you need to develop that mindset that you need to give your best, like day after day, or like as the bowler does, like ball after ball. And that needs to be coached into a teacher, especially when you are, as I said again, teaching, dealing with high school students, where your role should be more of a coach and more of like a mentor to understand the world, rather than one of like, how do you really just communicate the matter itself.
Yeah, so you basically talked about two big building blocks. One is the technical, which is
Yeah.
the content aspect of a subject, and then the second is more soft skills like the behavioral
Right.
part of it. Like
Right.
how do you inculcate these good values
Hmm.
in a teachers, which are then imbibed by the students. So, talk to me about your experience in when you were in Teach for India. Like, I believe those were the private schools or the public schools. Where were you placed?
So Teach for India mostly serves in government schools and to some
Government
extent
school.
in low-income private schools as well, because India and many of the other countries in the global south have affordable private schools. So the school I taught in was an affordable private school in a low-income community. The fee was about, I distinctly remember, 8,450 rupees INR at that point of time, which was roughly $100 per year, which was also a significant amount of money back then. So it used to roughly work out to a little bit more than 500 rupees per month per student at that point of time. And this is the fee in grade 9 and 10.
So, based on your experience, what do you think where our efforts should be focused on? And I'm asking you this question because we are in the process of designing a fellowship for global exchange for the teachers from government schools of India who are STEM educators. Like, which are the areas in the technical skills should we focus, or first we should focus more on their value based education, like more of a professionalism side?
So I think the first thing that needs to be done to make anybody, like whether it's for STEM education or irrespective, is to focus on foundational literacy and numeracy. One of the reasons I was able to teach well in my classroom is because my students were coached well in English by the teachers who taught them, by the Teach for India fellows who taught them from grade 3 to 8 as well. Because they had good English teachers, the kids knew English well, and as a result, I was able to leverage that to be able to, to deconstruct complex maths ideas. So even if the focus is on STEM education, without foundation literacy and numeracy, things are not going to fly. So how do you really coach teachers well who are teaching students in classrooms from K to 2 to 3? How do you really equip them to be able to deconstruct basic reading, basic knowledge recall, and how to read sentences and frame sentences, those basic writing skills as well. But reading comprehension and numeracy, the basic mathematical operations, those are the most important. uh, any country whose like public education system looks to like develop, uh, wants like basically lead to economic development, we need students who have that foundation literacy. From my experience, the students who were best at like spoken English or who were able to communicate well in English are the ones who are doing well in their careers right now. Like they completed a college education and they have jobs in which they're getting like formal salaries and benefits and stuff like that, which their previous generations were not able to. This again comes from literacy, which comes in literacy education, especially in English. So I would urge you to focus on that to quite a large extent. The second focus then should be on access and exposure because it's a VUCA world, right? It's volatile, it's uncertain, there's complex, there's a lot of uncertainty around, and the students have just so much of information available to them at hand right now with the internet. And as internet becomes cheaper and smartphones become more will penetrate further in India and the rest of the global south, students will have more questions about what they can really do. And then teachers need to be able to play that role, or like something like a teacher aide in terms of like a counselor or a social worker needs to be brought in to be able to debrief with them about what really they can do in like STEM careers. And STEM careers doesn't necessarily mean that you tell them that you get into engineering or like give a medical entrance exam, which is typically what happens in some of these career counseling sessions in India, right? It's also about telling them what are some of the other backup options and what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of following a certain trajectory, and like telling them that this is what you need to do today to be able to reach there. And also, more importantly, in the Indian context, telling them that it's okay if you can't achieve some of those goals. Because in India, at least back 10, 20 years back, everybody would tell you that, oh, you need to go to IIT or you want to go to AIMS or like one of the top medical colleges. But everybody who goes to other colleges as well also has a shot at being able to build a good career. And debriefing that and telling them, reinforcing this is extremely important so that students don't get that pressure in their heads these days.
Very interesting. You brought out a very interesting point about the ability to have a good grasp over language, because inadvertently when we learn about science and mathematics, the comprehensions are complex and you need a certain amount of English comprehension in that. But there is a very interesting argument which is going on in the global south and in the global realm, especially in the think tank space, which says about decolonization of education space. And by decolonization, their emphasis is on multilingual education, where they're saying you need to, the concept that the student has to have a very good English is a very colonial concept. And in states like, I'm talking about states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, which are predominantly Hindi speaking states, and the English of students is, and even the legacy that they have, the legacy of slavery from the past, their English is not that good. So, what are your prompters, or where are the areas where you think that, or are there any innovative approaches that you have come across where students who are historically not at advantage of having good English, as opposed to in those states of India which are near the sea and where English speaking is relatively better because of, Anglo-Indian influence. What are the different approaches that you see where their mother tongue instruction can be strengthened? Plus, of course, English is a global language. You have to eventually learn English. There's no doubt about it. But how can we do the multilingual education and also emphasize on decolonization?
So, like personally, I won't be able to answer in terms of approaches because it's something like a language instructor or probably somebody who taught social studies, where like language is a very important component, will be able to answer better, right? As a math teacher, my role is to be able to. A large part of my teaching was in English itself, about 80% of it, and I did use Hindi at times to, or maybe a little bit of Marathi as well, to deconstruct certain information to students who were not like able to grasp material really well in English itself. I am all in favor of multi-language learning, and we need people to learn at least two, if not three, languages in India. In the southern states, or like even in Maharashtra, people learn three languages, right? Of course, there are certain disadvantages with learning multiple languages. It takes so much of energy, and that takes away from learning newer content areas, especially in social sciences or like the STEM sciences or math itself. That's a debate on which I will not be able to comment on. I am just in favor of multi-language instruction, multi-language learning, especially up to say the grade 10 level itself. I wish I was more in touch with Hindi and Marathi, or at least being able to like write in those languages at this age. And I'm going to try and coach myself into like reversing that, to like developing those skills again at a later stage for sure. But that said, like this is a discussion I had recently with somebody else when I was in Mumbai, and we were talking about jobs and like what helps students, right? Like, so if you think about it, like a large part of our aspiration of coaching students is for them to be able to find employment or to become job creators. Now, for that, they need to be able to integrate largely in the manufacturing and services economy, right? And in India, unfortunately, unlike in Europe, almost entirely the economy runs on English. And only once a student is like skilled at English, or like the soft skills
That's
that
true.
gently are communicated in English, those doors of socioeconomic mobility open for them. Unless they are so skilled, where they're whether they are Hindi as a first language speaker or Marathi as a first language speaker, then their skill takes them ahead in life. For example, hypothetically, there is a person who's really good at coding in Python or some other language, for which also they'll need to learn English, but their communication is entirely in Hindi or Marathi, or for that matter, any other language. In that case, maybe this person will be able to like unlock opportunities and get a job. But even then, to be able to really maximize their potential, the person needs to learn English. As a result, we need really solid instruction for English, if not as a first language, at least as a second language, where the rigor level brings you to the level where you are at least able to like read, speak well, and write decently well. You don't have to be Shashi Tharoor or like Ram Gua or Shakespeare, but at least that basic level of like office communication needs to be there so that you survive and we are able to like thrive in a work environment. So we need that level of instruction. I'm all for decolonization. I'm all for like, supporting Hindi literature, Marathi literature, and there's a lot of depth there. One of the best books I read in 2024 was a translation of a Tamil novel as well. There's a lot of depth there, and that needs to be communicated. But English language instruction is important. Kids need to be skilled on it so that they can get jobs and become employable. And as we all know, that's a large problem that India is facing these days. Is how do you really coach this bulging and growing workforce, which is our demographic dividend as we speak of, right? Like, unless they are skilled and unless they are able to access the economy, it'll be difficult. Otherwise, they'll just continue in informal jobs as well. And that's my observation. Those who, even who are not that good at English, who still probably went to like high school, did 12th standard or did college, they ended up in informal jobs or like small family businesses again after that.
No, that's very interesting that, in a linguistically diverse country like India, you have to have a stronghold on your mother tongue. You have to have a stronghold on Hindi because that's one sort of a national language. And from the demands perspective, like you have to have a stronghold on English because that's where the job is, that's a job requirement. And what ultimately we are going to strive for is like you need to have that language proficiency. That's very
Exactly.
interesting.
Now,
So,
unless we reach a situation where office communication shifts to Hindi or Marathi or
yeah.
other state languages, then of course there's a premium on learning those languages. But
Yeah.
till then, bringing about that systemic shift is going to be really hard.
It's really
And a
hard
lot of
and
global
it's
companies look at India because they see an English language speaking population.
right. And I think the what happens in Europe that they have so many resources for European languages and every website is in their specific European language. Every document, policy document is available there. To go to that point, there will be a hell lot of stakeholders that will be required to work and have the same agenda, that let's take pride in our national languages and do it. It's not just a matter of teachers who are teaching STEM and you know science and mathematics.
Exactly.
Okay, so Dakshesh, you mentioned a few minutes ago about that for the ages 12 to 18 is the most crucial time where the students make these decisions about whether should I take a science stream or should I take into the mathematics stream. And you also mentioned that their exposure to the different kind of jobs that require these subjects is the most one of the most important criteria where they make these decisions. So, what do you think are what's the role of technology? Because now technology has brought everything closer. Now technology has made everything remote, and like what's happening in Mumbai can be telecasted to somebody who is in Lucknow or in Muzaffarpur or Meerut, and like these 2 and 3 tier towns. So, what do you see? What are the emerging trends in those areas?
Okay, so this is actually a problem I've really thought of a lot in terms of like what we call as career counseling in India. I had very briefly worked on this for an Indian tech firm as well, I forgot mentioning. But there are three major areas I can see technology can play in helping students identify their careers, right? Which is one, which is simply what the internet does is to offer resources, to provide knowledge to students that this is out there. And if there is a resource which like gives students at the age of like say 13 to 18 all the possible pathways that they can like explore and like give them like some information on it, that's one way of doing it, right? Like, so I remember there used to be a website called stupidsit.com when I was in college, which now is called this app called Yocket, which became famous for like providing information to students about branches of engineering, about different colleges, about what are the pathways in the long run. And it used to be just simple content, which was readable for any student who wasn't like that well read in English as well. That's one way of looking at it. The second way is the more there's the more technical area of this is called assessments, which is to do psychometric assessments, so just seeing what's best fit for you, trying to assess what your interests are, what your mindsets are, and then recommend, or even your capabilities, and then recommend that, hey, this is what you are good at, this is what you're interested in, and possibly this is also where there is a demand. You should explore career 1, 2, 3, 4, and like coming up with a report of this. And there are lots of assessments out there, and I think pretty much all the major psychology departments in India at least have some sort of person working on this. So like they have people thinking about this, and how do you tell people what they're good to do when they are trying to answer this question for their lives at that stage. The third thing is, which is something like say simply what LinkedIn does, which is connecting people. Like if this is, and which is what Americans do really well, that even high school kids, and I see slowly Indian high school kids, especially in the uppermost private schools, the IB and IGCSE and ISC ones, they connect with people and they reach out to them and say, hey, I'm interested in working in climate and sustainability. Can you tell me what your work is? What's the good part? What's the bad part? And why do you think I should pursue this? Or just reach out and have these conversations, right? And I think that's really important, because then you should understand from a working person's perspective what works well and what doesn't. In the United States, especially in graduate schools, we are told to have these coffee chats when we come in, and we're told to like converse and engage with people as much as you can, learn about their work, and build like an informed decision so that you just don't end up in a job uh, just for the sake of it. Now, that's something that needs to be inculcated in students, especially in colleges in India as well, and possibly even in high schools. And this is not just for the top schools, but even in your government schools and your low income private schools. Of course, they might not have the network access to it, which is where something like an intervention where a non-profit or even a for-profit organization can solve this by building a solution. Again, some very similar to LinkedIn, just connecting people and offer that mentorship and advice to people who so that they can take a call on where they can go ahead.
So basically, we need a LinkedIn for high school students of India who are in the sort of in the middle school to high school transition period, so that they can have that real life communication with people who are in these sectors and industries, and have first-hand experiences.
Not even a new tool, just coach students on how to use LinkedIn well. Like nowadays,
Exactly.
whenever I go back to India or even remotely, many of my students who reach out to me who are now in the workforce, I tell them to make a LinkedIn profile, put up like a professional description, or display picture which looks professional, write about your interest, and then just make a good online presence, especially on LinkedIn. It'll help them.
And this brings me to a question like how many teachers are on LinkedIn? Let's before students, if we really see like the digital connectivity, how many teachers, STEM educators are on LinkedIn? That would be very questionable, I think.
You're right. It may not be a very high number, especially in India. And of course, Teach for India fellows is a rare specimen. They're not exactly like real teachers in like a low income private school or in a government school, right? But again, these things can be changed. This can be brought top down. It also depends. It also will change once teaching becomes more aspirational as a career in India rather than as one where, oh, I gave 5 government exams and then because I didn't clear all of those 5 exams, the last thing I'll do is become a teacher. So that mindset of like what a teacher really is needs to change. And one of my aspirations in my life is that if I make enough money in my 30s, I'll go back and become a maths teacher in my 40s and try and change how do you really aspire to become a teacher, because that requires some real imagination.
This brings us to a point where, when we were designing our fellowship, the name of the fellowship is Pehel, and
Hmm.
Pehel means first initiative. The one question one of the donors asked is like, why exactly are you doing this fellowship? What is that new thing? And our response to that was, we want to restore the respect for teaching profession. And that's
That's
essentially
nice.
that you are saying like, did you become a teacher because you wanted to become a teacher, or you became a teacher because you have to do something, and that's where the passion comes into the profession?
Again, so I can speak because I was a Teach for India fellow, and that's of course a pathway through a non-profit program which is very well marketed, and Shine Mystery is like a star in marketing, and like everybody should learn from her on how to market the program. And the story sold really well to us. So many of us aspire to become Teach for India fellows, but I became a Teach for India fellow because I wanted to teach, because I thought that inequality was a large problem in Mumbai. Born and brought up in Mumbai and seen inequality day in and day out while growing up, and I had a problem with that, and I thought I should do something to solve it. And then I had certain experiences in college which kind of pushed me to consider this pathway as well. And as a result, I ended up applying for the Teach for India fellowship and then served for 2 years, right? But not everybody thinks like that. And even in Teach for India, there are some people who come for other reasons as well. That's not for me to speak about right now, but it's not like everybody comes there just for the sake of education.
Mm, interesting. So for
One thing I
the
really want to
yeah.
like say through this podcast is that it's really important to see whether you can source working professionals into the teaching job, right? Like into the
Jobs.
teaching industry itself. Somebody say who's worked 8 to 10 years, maybe 12 or 15 years in a job, who's seen the real world, either say in accounting, in engineering, in medicine, law, whatever have you, who can then come to a classroom, especially in a high school classroom, and tell students that this is what you need to really do to become a professional 10 or 15 years down the line. Because these people have seen the real world. They are not academic. They know what skills are required. They know what mindsets are required, what soft skills are required. And they should be there. They should be able to coach students then in high school to be able to achieve that in through those 4 or 5 years of high school itself.
Interesting. So for the states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, do
Mhm.
you have any insights on based on your work or like the news articles that you read or what comes in the media? What what have been your frustrations, and what do you think how where the resources should go to, because these two states have one of the largest populations in India. The graduation rates are low, the number of students that go into STEM field is also very low. If you
Right.
see in the ranking, it's predominantly the southern states that dominates when it comes to STEM education and STEM careers. So to for India to really achieve sustainable development goals, we cannot forget about these two states. So what have been your frustration points, and if you have more resources, what would you like to do for them?
So all of my recommendations are going to be based on secondhand information of perceiving students from those states, what I've read and what I've like learned through the development sector, and just basically through conversations with people who were my classmates or colleagues who came from that state, those states as well, right? So number one, of course, I think as I already mentioned, we need a large focus on foundation literacy and numeracy, and I think kudos to Central Square Foundation. At least in Uttar Pradesh, they're running this program with a fund to implement Nipun Bharat in partnership with the UP state government. So they really need to double down on foundation literacy and numeracy so that by the time students in not just your public schools but even in your low income private schools reach grade 2 and 3, they are well up on that learning as well, right? The second, I think, is a very important mindset coaching that needs to be done in high schools is to like push students away from government exams. I think that the whole aspiration that oh somebody who's a college graduate should give like UPSC or PCS or like any of the other government exams, SBI PO, is just antithetical to the purpose of economic growth, right? Like you'll see people spending 5 6 years of their lives in their 20s just giving those exams and not clearing. You're just losing the best years of your life for an aspiration that is sold to you, which is probably a 100-year-old story, right? So you need to like coach students to like move away from there. And like people from Bihar are really, really smart. Like uh, I always share this example, and I'm going to do it today as well. Is the story of one of my wingmates and classmates from NIT Suratkal who came from Gaya in Bihar, who largely studied in Hindi and then semi-English medium. And then he came to do electrical engineering in NIT Suratkal and then eventually got a job in City Corp Services. But he's an outlier by his city, his town and Jilla standards. He also learned English while we were at NIT Suratkal by speaking with us and, as he says, by watching English movies. But he put in that effort to be able to coach himself. So he's a star story, which I always tell people and motivate them to like push yourself to grow at every possible age. So you need to develop those mindsets in like a large number of people so that they don't get caught into this whole government exam system, right? Like something along those lines. That's the second one. Third thing, when I may get some flack for saying this, but and this is not just true for UP Bihar, but I think pretty much for all states, maybe a little bit more in northern India in general, is for gender sensitivity to be brought into like men. You need to coach students from kindergarten, especially men. I mean boys, or like babies, they are at that age, in respecting women. And that starts at kindergarten. You can't expect like a grade 10 student who's seen 15, 16 years of life to suddenly start respecting. It needs to be inculcated through reading, through debate, through discussion, and teachers will play a huge role in integrating gender sensitivity in the next generation of students as well, especially um, in parts of India where you see that crime against women is a lot more, women economic empowerment metrics are not the highest there, especially. And I think you need to have some sort of like a gender officer at like the Zilla Parishad level who visits schools and coaches teachers and like sits with them and tells them how do you really integrate gender sensitivity in your instruction in classrooms every day. Similarly, I think we need to be able to integrate sustainability and understanding of climate and environment a lot more. And again, that consciousness needs to be brought in from kindergarten itself and not just like teaching environmental education and science in grade 8, 9, and 10. It's too late by then. And especially if you want to bring about deep behavioral changes in society, you need to catch them very young. And I think that, again, you need some sort of intervention on sustainability and climate consciousness. And this is not true for UPBR, but for like all states in general.
Okay, so I think this topic around gender sensitivity is directly related to having more women teachers who are STEM educators in these two states. What's been your experience, and what do you think are the challenges in recruiting good teachers? Because recently, after the Ninth Pay Commission, the the salaries have been good, but still there has been challenges in recruiting good teachers. What do you think are the challenges, and what can be done at systemic level?
So, I mean, firstly, I'm glad that the Ninth Pay Commission has recommended higher salaries. That's definitely one important thing. What should be also considered is like what's the growth, or what's the growth trajectory for a teacher itself, right? Like in terms of monetary compensation, in terms of benefits, It's not just about the money that you're paying a teacher at time X, right? It's also a lot of physical work. Teachers tend to fall sick, especially when they work in classrooms where they don't have the best of facilities, right? So you need better health care for them. So the benefits aspect also needs to be considered, and I'm not sure of what Ninth Pay Commission recommends, but I'm sure somebody or the other is aware of that problem and knows that public school teachers and even low income private school teachers should be given some sort of support for this matter, right? That's one. Second, I think we need really strong, good PR, right? Like our best teachers, their stories need to be told. Like their stories of success and what they do for their students need to be like out there so that people aspire to become teachers. Like for example, I'll tell you, I have this cousin who's a banker in London. His belief is that those who become teachers are those who can't do anything else in their life because he never had any really good teachers when he was in school. And this is typically what a lot of people who work in certain professions believe. Now, this is a very problematic view, and one way of changing that is to have very strong PR and narratives around what the role of a teacher is in terms of shaping society. Now, I know that traditionally in India, the role of a guru and like the role of a guru in a child's life or a person's life in shaping their life is a very strong one and that used to be there, but it needs to be retold in a modern way, right? Like it needs to be out there in your social media, it needs to be out there in your face as much as possible for you to be able to really understand that the role of a teacher and respect what they do and the hard work that goes into it. And I think it's also about incentivizing the right talent to do this work. I think there's this movie in which Amitabh Bachchan plays a teacher. I think it's called Arakshan or something like that, where he says, very colloquially, he says something like India should have India teaching services or something like that as a way of incentivizing the best talent. But we need really good talent to come in, which is not just people who are doing this because it's the last career option, but who are seeing this as like like a trajectory, and that will come when they have money, they have benefits, they have that environment in which they are promised growth. And I think there's a lot that can be learned from some of the school systems, say especially in Finland, in Canada, Singapore, where teachers are given a lot more respect and how they drive society itself, and that needs to be inculcated and like taught at like that needs to be like communicated to all graduates in the coming years so that they see this as a particular viable trajectory.
One last question for you. If there is one thing that you need to change in the national education policy, what that be?
Oh, there's a lot of things, but I'm not really. While since I've read the document, but I would really double down on climate consciousness and gender sensitivity. How do you really integrate that in your students' work? Right. Somewhere I remember reading that some critiques that India has a software problem of people rather than a hardware problem of infrastructure or something along those lines, and that we really need to change that in people. And the best way of doing this is through like integrating it in education. So irrespective of all the advanced math and STEM and tech and all of those things, of course, we need foundation literacy, but ensuring that we put out good people who are socially inclusive, who want to contribute to society and become productive citizens, and who are aware of their biases, emotionally intelligent people. We should be able to. We really need to integrate these important aspects of life in our education from childhood itself. Gender sensitivity, climate consciousness, just being inclusive and not differentiating against people based on caste or religion and whatever other axes or metrics or their sexuality itself. Um, these are really important things. Some of the teachers who used to teach in my school who were not Teach for India fellows harbored a lot of these biases, and I had to debate with them and try and tell them that we can't be so biased. We're teachers, and we have to treat each student with merit. Of course, not all students are going to be great, and some of them, of course, require a certain amount of uh, strong treatment or like tough love to be able to get the best out of them or just coach them into being who they are or like just meeting the basic requirements. But as teachers, we should not really harbor a lot of biases.
And one question is for our internal reflection. You have worked with Brookings. So, what has been your experience working with Rebecca? Because She is a well-known figure in this sector, and she is just amazing. How has been your experience? What projects did you work on? And what is that Indian think tanks should take up in the education space? Because Brookings being a foreign think tank doing great work, but if we have to bring it to Indian think tank, what it should be?
So I'll answer two parts, which is one what I did at Brookings, and it was I actually only worked with them for 3 months as a research assistant. 90% of my work for Rebecca was to assist her on the book that she was then writing, which very recently got published. I think it's called The Disengaged Teen, and it was using some of my training in quantitative analysis and statistics at Columbia University to be able to interpret a few research papers and academic literature for her and to like offer offer condensed insights, and then transcribing a lot of interviews and offering insights from those in written material for her book itself. Basic Excel work that they wanted for like some sort of a dashboard was the other major area of work for me, but it was largely assisting Rebecca in her book writing itself, right? I honestly think that, I mean, I have some very strong views about think tanks now, especially in the education spaces, that they need to develop partnerships with implementation organizations like, say, Pratham, Teach for India, Akanksha Foundation, which I have the deepest respect for, IT schools, and other such networks, and learn from what challenges they are facing. Like, speak to teachers in the front line in Akanksha and I teach and other such organizations. See what challenges they are facing and develop their research and advocacy and analysis behind what the problems such teachers face. And similarly, even in vocational education as well, like what some of the trainers in vocational education schools are facing, ITIs are facing, and advocate for that change as well. So stay connected with the first mile who deals with students, who deals with parents, who understands what the aspirations of society are. Try and understand why those aspirations are there, what are the challenges which are constraining the achievement of those aspirations. And then as a result, understanding what the government can do or what even civil society and the private sector can do through their channels as well to be able to overcoming these constraints. That's how I would reverse problem solve it. Like the end should not be publishing a report or like writing X number of papers, but using that to be able to inform, say, stakeholders in the government or the private sector, pushing conversations. It's about the dialogue that you can create around it, or like influencing action, say, with a nonprofit who's working in the implementation side, or by influencing a certain philanthropist or like or any sort of donor or like an international agency putting money to be able to act on what you are publishing. It's about influencing action rather than the number of papers, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Dakshesh. It has been a very interesting conversation. Are there any
Thank you.
questions that is still boggling in your mind?
There's a lot, but I mean, that's in different areas of things. These days, I think more about climate and sustainability. That's my current area of work, more in education. But yeah, I mean, I was just reading this interesting article about Olympiad education in India and how students in Olympiads in India are doing much better than they used to be earlier, which is a really good thing. And I think it should be like it should be studied about how many of these students come from low income communities, because there will be a lot of students who come from backgrounds where they can't access resources, but they'll be really good at advanced math and science, and they can't fulfill their potential. And governments should do something to be able to fulfill their potential. I know it's a very small audience. In fact, there are a lot more projects or like initiatives where the government would want to put their money, but this is something that needs to be considered as well.
So for sustainability, there, of course, there are going to be a lot of funding which is going to come to in COP28. COP again for decarbonization and carbon connect. You need a lot of workforce from the green economy and the blue economy, and it's all depends on STEM education. And they have to have these critical thinking skills, the 21st century skills. And is there a national mandate that's happening to bring more STEM students into the blue economy and the green economy, or how do you see this the sustainability agenda getting broken down into small actionable steps?
I'm not sure of a national mandate. I mean, I'm not somebody sitting in Delhi the whole time, and neither am I in DC. I just know that there's a lot of literature out there which says that green jobs are going to grow. Green jobs are the like the future, or like you need green skills in your day-to-day jobs in the future, in the coming years, so on and so forth. yes, as you said, that there is a requirement for training, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, all those 8 C's I think are really important, which is which you need to integrate in your high school education or middle school education itself onwards. But there are specific content areas or like knowledge pieces which become more and more relevant as you want a more sustainable economy, which becomes more relevant, like say more at a college or like grad school level. We're talking about greenhouse gas emission accounting, life cycle analysis, sustainability reporting and accounting, and that kind of sustainability reporting and understanding disclosures and standards that are out there. Of course, there's a lot more that can be spoken about from especially the energy side about modeling and stuff. But again, these are very technical areas which fall in the purview of college education and beyond. But that said, I mean, I think there's a really important need to have like a content area on sustainability and climate itself in either as an independent area of study in high schools or at least a part of science education itself or social sciences.
Right. So I'm sure there are so many questions that are still, waiting for the answers. And I think a conversation like these are important, where we understand how the world is shaping and how teachers training remains an important component of STEM education. And I hope your insights and experiences will be really valuable for us to shape the Pahel Fellowship. Any questions do you have before we close out this session?
No, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I was really happy to speak about all these things after a very long time. As I said, don't work so much in education, so it's really a good throwback for me to like, think about those times and answer some of the questions that you put to me then as well.
Thank you so much, Dakshesh, and hope we'll be in touch and we'll invite you again for more in-depth interview.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.